You know, there's a quiet out here on the plains you can't find anywhere else. It's a silence that's full of life, the rustle of corn, the cry of a hawk. It's the sound of my whole world. Or, at least, it was, before my own son, Leo, stood up in a cold, sterile courtroom and let his wife tell a judge that this land, my land, was better off without me. With all due respect, Your Honor, she can't even remember to pay the electric bill. Handing her control of a multi-million-dollar farming operation isn't just irresponsible. It's dangerous. Dangerous, that's what they called me. After 50 years of running this farm, of raising a family on this very soil, I was dangerous. I lost it all that day. The farm, the house my Arthur built with his own 2 hands, and the custody of my grandkids. But what they didn't know, what I didn't know, was that my Arthur, mon amour, he'd left behind one last secret. A truth buried in the dust and memories, just waiting for the right time to be unearthed. But let me start where the storm first began to gather. On a Thanksgiving morning that felt just like any other. The kitchen was bustling with warmth and life. The air was thick with the smell of roasting turkey, cinnamon, and fresh baked bread. I was humming, pulling a glistening apple pie from the oven. The sound of a car pulling up the long gravel driveway could be heard, followed by the joyful shouts of children. The screen door creaked open and slammed shut. A sound as familiar to me as my own heartbeat. Grandma, 8-year-old Caleb and 6-year-old Daisy came barreling into the kitchen. A whirlwind of autumn coats and rosy cheeks. I knelt, my old knees protesting just a bit, and wrapped them in a hug that smelled of flour and love. They were my world, those two, the best parts of my son, Leo, and my late husband, Arthur, all rolled into 2 perfect, giggling packages. Leo followed them in, stooping to get his tall frame through the doorway. He gave me a tired smile and a one-armed hug. Hey, Mom, place smells amazing, as always. And then came Isabel. She glided into my rustic farmhouse kitchen like she was stepping onto a yacht. Her coat was a sharp, black cashmere thing that probably cost more than my tractor tires, and her heeled boots clicked with an alien rhythm on the worn linoleum. She held a store-bought cheesecake in a pristine white box out in front of her like a peace offering or a shield. Margaret, she said, her smile bright and tight. Happy Thanksgiving. I hope you don't mind. I brought dessert, just in case you were too swamped. The subtext was as clear as a prairie sky after a storm. Just in case your homemade baking wasn't up to par. How thoughtful, dear, I said, taking the box and placing it on the far end of the counter. Well away from my pies. There's always room for more. The day unfolded in a series of these small, sharp moments. At the dinner table, surrounded by the bounty I had spent 3 days preparing, Isabel picked at her food. You know, Leo and I were just reading an article, she began, dabbing her lips with a napkin, about modernizing legacy farms. The potential for scaling an operation like this, it's astronomical. With the right management. Leo shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The one his father used to sit in. Izzy, maybe not today, huh? It's Thanksgiving. Oh, I'm just dreaming, she said, waving a dismissive hand, her diamond ring catching the light. But you have to admit, Margaret, a single person running all this, it's a lot to handle. Things can slip through the cracks. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November wind rattling the windows. I looked at my son, hoping he'd defend me, defend our way of life. But he just stared down at his plate, carving his turkey with intense focus. A man caught between 2 worlds. Later, as I was washing dishes, Caleb came up beside me. Grandma, why did Mommy say your brain is getting scrambled? I froze, the soapy plate nearly slipping from my hands. I turned and looked at him, his innocent face searching mine for an answer. What did you say, sweetie? She was on the phone. She said, it's getting worse. Leo, her brain is getting all scrambled. We have to do something before she burns the whole place down. I knelt down, my heart aching. Oh, honey, Mommy was just, she worries. That's all, grown-up talk. But as I watched him run back to the living room, I saw Isabel watching me from the doorway. Her expression unreadable. She hadn't been worried. She had been planting a seed. And I, standing in the heart of my own home, was the soil she intended to plow. The storm wasn't just gathering anymore. A few drops of freezing rain had already begun to fall. After that Thanksgiving, a subtle poison began to seep into the soil of our lives. It wasn't fast, it was a slow, creeping rot. Isabel started calling every day, her voice dripping with a sickly sweet concern. Just checking in. Margaret, did you remember to take your vitamins? Did you remember you have that dentist appointment on Friday? Every question was a tiny shovel, digging away at the foundations of my confidence. Then, things started to get strange. My truck keys, which have hung on the same hook by the door for 40 years, turned up in the sugar bowl. A pot of water I'd put on for tea was left to boil dry, filling the house with a metallic, burning smell, even though I could have sworn I turned the burner off. One afternoon, Leo called, his voice tight with a forced calm. Mom, Isabel said you called her 3 times this morning to ask the same question about the kids' school fundraiser. I hadn't. I had called her once. But as I sat there in my quiet kitchen, the silence seemed to mock me. Or had I? My memory, once a steel trap, suddenly felt like a sieve. Isabel was gaslighting me, of course. But the worst part of that particular cruelty is that it makes you gaslight yourself. It makes you believe you're the one holding the match. The final straw, for Leo at least, came on a Tuesday in early December. Isabel had dropped the kids off for the afternoon. She left a detailed, typed-out list of instructions, as if I didn't know my own grandchildren's routines. On the list, in bold, underlined letters, it said, "No peanuts. Caleb has a mild allergy. Caleb has never been allergic to a single thing in his life. He eats my peanut butter cookies by the dozen." When I questioned it, Isabel gave me a pitying look. "Margaret, we discussed this. Dr. Evans confirmed it last month. Please, just be careful." I was so flustered, so full of a confusing mix of indignation and self-doubt, that I spent the whole afternoon in a state of high anxiety, checking and rechecking every label on every snack in my pantry. Later that evening, Isabel called Leo, hysterical. She claimed she'd found a half-eaten peanut butter cookie in Caleb's coat pocket. That was it. That was the tipping point. A week later, a sleek, unfamiliar sedan pulled up my driveway, churning up the gravel. A man in a crisp suit, looking terribly out of place against the backdrop of my barn, handed me a thick manila envelope. My hands trembled as I read the legal jargon. Petition for conservatorship, incompetence, endangerment to minors. The words were cold, clinical, and they were signed by my son, Leo Miller. The fight, if you could call it that, was a blur of humiliation. It wasn't a battle, it was a foregone conclusion. Isabel and Leo had a high-powered lawyer from the city who spoke in a language I didn't understand. I had a local attorney, a good man who usually handled property deeds and wills, and he looked just as overwhelmed as I felt. Isabel had her dossier, a thick, damning collection of her own lies, bound in a neat folder. There were photos of the stove burner I'd supposedly left on, a signed affidavit from a neighbor, a new person in town I'd only ever waved to, claiming she'd seen me wandering the cornfields at night. Disoriented, there was even a note from Caleb's doctor about his peanut allergy. A lie Isabel had somehow managed to get into his official medical records. "Mom, this isn't what I wanted," Leo told me in the courthouse hallway, his eyes red-rimmed, refusing to meet mine. We're trying to protect you. To protect the kids. Isabel says, she says this is the only way. The only way to what? Leo? I asked, my voice a raw whisper. To take my home? To take my grandchildren? He had no answer. He just stood there, a ghost of the boy I'd raised, letting his wife's ambition hollow him out from the inside. In the end, it took the judge less than an hour. I watched as the life my Arthur and I had built, every sunrise over the corn, every family dinner, every scraped knee I'd kissed better, was reduced to a checklist of my failures, all of them fabricated. The gavel fell. The sound was so final, so absolute. It was the sound of an axe splitting a log, the sound of a life being cleaved in two. Temporary conservatorship of the estate was granted to Leo and Isabel Miller. Full custody of Caleb and Daisy Miller was granted to their parents. I was to vacate my home within the week. I remember looking across the courtroom and seeing Isabel. She wasn't smiling in triumph. None. That would have been too obvious. She had a single, perfect tear rolling down her cheek. And she was clutching Leo's arm in a flawless performance of a heartbroken daughter-in-law. Forced to do the unthinkable. But her eyes, when they met mine for a fleeting second, were as cold and hard as the winter earth. They held no sorrow, only victory. Packing up a life is a brutal kind of archaeology. You dig through layers of memories. Each object you touch a fossil from a forgotten time. I had a week, 7 days to condense 40 years of marriage, motherhood, and hard-won joy into a handful of cardboard boxes. The movers Isabel hired, 2 young men who looked uncomfortable, like they knew they were attending a funeral, worked with a detached efficiency. Wrapping my life in paper and tape. I couldn't direct them, I couldn't speak, I just drifted through the rooms. A ghost in my own home. My hand traced the pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe. A ladder of lines showing Leo's height from a wobbly toddler to a young man who stooped to kiss my cheek. Now, he stooped for nothing. In the living room, I saw the faint indentation on the floral armchair where Arthur used to sit every evening, reading his almanacs. The movers wrapped it in plastic, suffocating the memory. Leo never came. Isabel dropped off the kids once for a supervised 1-hour visit. They were quiet, their eyes wide and confused. Mommy says you have to go to a special quiet house now. Grandma, Daisy whispered, clutching my hand, so your brain can rest. I held back a sob that clawed at my throat and just hugged them. Breathing in the scent of their hair and trying to burn the feeling of their small arms around my neck into my memory. On the final day, I packed one small box for myself. A photo of Arthur and me on our wedding day. My mother's old recipe book. Its pages soft and stained with vanilla. A clay handprint Caleb had made in kindergarten. That was all I could bear to take. The rest was just stuff. The house, stripped of its soul, was no longer mine. They didn't even make me leave the property entirely. That was Isabel's final, perfect cruelty. My new home was to be Arthur's old workshop. A glorified barn at the far edge of our land. A full half-mile from the main house. It was close enough that I could see the lights of my home in the evening. A constant, painful reminder of everything I had lost. The workshop was just as he'd left it 2 years ago. The air hung thick and still, smelling of sawdust, old oil, and the metallic tang of cold steel. A thick blanket of dust covered everything, and the only light came from a single grimy window. A pale, milky square against the gloom. Arthur's tools hung in neat rows on the pegboard walls, their outlines traced in black marker. A testament to his orderly mind. His work boots, caked in the same soil I now felt exiled from, sat by the door. For 2 days, I didn't move. I sat on an old wooden stool, wrapped in a blanket, and let the grief wash over me in waves. This was it. This was the end of my story. I was no longer a wife, a mother, a grandmother in any meaningful way. I was just an old woman in a dusty workshop, waiting for time to run out. Say Feeny, I thought. It's over. The silence was the hardest part. It was a dead silence, not the living quiet of the fields. Here, there was no hum of the refrigerator, no creak of the floorboards upstairs, no distant laughter from the grandkids. There was only the mournful whistle of the wind through a crack in the wall and the frantic beating of my own broken heart. Mon cœur. On the 3rd day, a profound loneliness pushed me to my feet. I couldn't just sit here and disappear. That's not how Arthur would have wanted it. I saw a half-finished project on his workbench, a small, intricately carved wooden bird, meant for Daisy's last birthday. He'd never had the chance to finish it. His carving tools lay beside it, as if he'd just stepped out for a moment. My fingers, trembling, picked up a piece of sandpaper. I sat on his stool and began to sand the rough edges of the bird's wing. Back and forth, back and forth. The repetitive motion was a comfort. A small act of creation in the midst of all this destruction. I wasn't Margaret Miller, the competent farm owner, anymore, but maybe, just maybe, I could be the woman who finished her husband's last gift. It wasn't a new beginning, but it was something, a flicker of a candle in the crushing, absolute dark. Finishing that little wooden bird for Daisy took me a week. My hands, clumsy at first, slowly remembered the feel of the wood, the give of the grain. As I worked, I started to feel Arthur's presence in that dusty workshop more strongly. Not as a ghost to be mourned, but as a quiet companion. It gave me the strength to do what I needed to do next, to bring order to his space. To honor his memory by tending to the last place that was truly his. Cleaning the workshop became my ritual. I started in one corner and worked my way around the room with a methodical slowness. I wiped the dust from his drill press, oiled the stiff joints of his table saw, and sorted a chaotic coffee can full of screws and bolts back into their little plastic organizers. Each task felt like a prayer. With every layer of grime I wiped away, it felt like I was clearing a little of the fog from my own mind. His books were on a tall, sturdy shelf he'd built into the back wall. Arthur wasn't a man for novels, he read things that were real. Things you could hold in your hands. There were manuals for tractor engines, books on crop rotation, soil chemistry, and meteorology, and then there was his prize collection, a complete 50-year run of the Old Farmer's Almanac. He'd sworn by them, tracking weather patterns and harvest yields year after year in their margins with his tiny, precise handwriting. I ran my fingers along their spines. A rainbow of faded yellows and blues. I decided to dust them off, one by one. I was halfway through the 1990s when I picked up the edition for 1995. It felt different, thicker, heavier. My heart gave a little flutter. I fanned the pages, and there, nestled in the section on planting by the signs of the zodiac, was a hollowed-out compartment. And inside that compartment, my fingers brushed against two things, a small, cold, brass key, and a folded piece of paper. The key was for a safe deposit box. I recognized the type, but it was the note that made the air catch in my lungs. It was Arthur's handwriting, but it looked rushed, urgent. It wasn't a letter, just a few cryptic lines. Maggie, my love, remember the North Star? Not the one in the sky, the one we planted. It watches over the 40, the iron horse sleeps there. I sank onto the stool, the note trembling in my hand. It was our secret language, a code built from a lifetime of shared moments. The North Star was what he called the massive, solitary oak tree at the northernmost edge of our property. The 40 was the back 40 acres, the heart of our land. And the iron horse, that was his nickname for his first ever tractor. A rusty old farmall he'd retired decades ago. He'd parked it under that oak tree as a monument to where we'd started. It was still there, a silent, rusting sentinel. He'd hidden something there. I waited until dusk, until the sky was streaked with purple and orange. I couldn't risk being seen. Pulling on Arthur's old barn coat, which still smelled faintly of him, I slipped out of the workshop. The air was cold and sharp, and my breath plumed in front of me. The walk to the North 40 felt like a pilgrimage. The familiar crunch of my boots on the frozen ground was the only sound. From the workshop, I could see the lights of my farmhouse blaze to life against the twilight. I saw figures moving behind the windows, my windows. A fresh wave of grief and anger washed over me, but I pushed it down. Whatever Arthur had hidden, it was more important. The old farmall tractor was a dark, hulking shape under the bare branches of the oak tree. It looked ancient, a relic from another time. The iron horse sleeps there, the note had said. I ran my hands over its cold, rusted fender, my eyes scanning for anything out of the ordinary. It took me 10 minutes of searching in the fading light before I found it. Not on the tractor itself, but beside it. One of the old cedar fence posts that marked the property line was different from the others. It had a small, almost invisible seam near its base. My fingers, numb with cold and anticipation, fumbled at the seam. A small section of the wood gave way, revealing not a hollow, but the dull gray metal of a waterproof, cylindrical container, the kind used for geocaching. It was wedged in tight. I had to use the heel of my boot to work it loose. The thudding sound echoing in the stillness of the evening. It was heavy, with my heart pounding in my chest. I twisted the cap. The seal broke with a hiss. Inside, protected by a layer of foam padding, was a small, rugged laptop and a thick, sealed man-to-manila envelope with a single word written on it in Arthur's hand. Margaret. I stood there, under the dark branches of our North Star oak, holding the secrets of the man I had loved for 40 years. The anger and grief were still there, but now, they had a new companion, a tiny, fierce, and dangerous spark of hope. I didn't even go back to the workshop right away. I just sat there in the dirt, the cold seeping into my bones. clutching that container to my chest like a lifeline. The moon had risen, casting long, skeletal shadows from the oak's branches. The world felt unreal, tilted on its axis. Finally, the biting wind drove me back inside, my mind a whirlwind of questions. Back in the workshop, I locked the door, a flimsy, useless gesture, but it made me feel safer. I set the container on Arthur's workbench, my hands shaking so badly it took me 3 tries to get the laptop out without dropping it. But first, the letter. My fingers, stiff with cold, carefully broke the seal on the envelope. Inside were several pages, filled with my husband's familiar, steady script. I took a deep breath and began to read. My dearest Maggie, if you are reading this, then the worst has happened. I am gone, and they have come for you. I am so sorry, mon amour, that I wasn't there to stop it. I am sorry for the secrets I had to keep. I only ever wanted to protect you. You've probably spent your whole life thinking I was just a simple farmer. That was the best cover I ever could have hoped for. The truth, my love, is that my degree in agronomy was a PhD in biogenetics. I wasn't just planting corn in these fields. Maggie, I was creating this farm, our home. It hasn't just been a farm for the last 20 years. It's been my private laboratory. And in that soil, I perfected my life's work. A seed, a strain of corn so resilient, so nutritious, so drought-resistant that it could change the face of global agriculture. I called it legacy. 15 years ago, I entered into a silent partnership, founding an agri-tech company called TerraGen to bring legacy to the world. I retained 51% ownership, majority control, under a private trust. The farm itself is listed as the patent holder. Maggie, the company is now worth billions. Our real net worth isn't in the land, but in the DNA of the very corn growing outside your window. I had to stop reading. My head was spinning. Billions? TerraGen? I'd seen the name on sacks of fertilizer, on the side of gleaming corporate headquarters in Des Moines. Arthur, my quiet, unassuming Arthur, who fixed tractors and read almanacs, a secret titan of industry. It felt impossible. My eyes scanned the rest of the page. I tell you this not to dazzle you with money, but so you understand what you are truly fighting for. It's not just the farm. It's the legacy. And Isabel knows it. I never trusted her. C'est la vie. Some people just set your teeth on edge. The day Leo brought her home, I saw something in her eyes. An ambition so sharp it could cut you. So, I did what you always called me paranoid for doing. I hired a man to look into her past. What he found was worse than I imagined. She comes from nothing, but she learned early how to attach herself to money. Her first marriage, her business ventures in Chicago, they all ended in ruin and debt. She's not just greedy, Maggie, she's desperate. She owes a very large, very dangerous amount of money to a loan shark in Chicago. A man who doesn't forgive debts. He was going to ruin her. Maybe worse. My investigator found out that somehow. She discovered the truth about my work. About TerraGen. She saw our son not as a husband, but as an access point. A tool. She targeted Leo to get to the farm. To get control of the patent. To solve her terrifying money problem once and for all. She has been playing a long, desperate game. A gasp escaped my lips. It all clicked into place. Her talk of scaling and potential. Her utter desperation to get me out of the way. It wasn't just about a farmhouse and a few $1 million. It was about a multi-billion-dollar agricultural patent that she saw as her only escape from a brutal fate. I read the final page of the letter. Tears now streaming down my face, not of sorrow, but of a fierce, burning mix of anger and awe. This laptop is your weapon. It contains all my research. The original patent filings, the corporate documents proving my, and now your, majority ownership of TerraGen. It also contains the complete file my investigator compiled on Isabel, including the name of her creditor in Chicago and the details of her debt. There are also copies of my will, which leaves the trust and all its assets directly to you. My lawyer, a good and loyal man named Ben Carter, has the original. He knows this day might come. He's been waiting for your call. Fight for our home, Maggie. Fight for our legacy. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You are not the frail, confused woman they have tried to make you. You are the woman who built this farm with me, Who faced down droughts and floods and bankers. You are Margaret Miller, and this is still your land. Forever yours, Arthur. I set the letter down on the workbench, my hands no longer shaking. A cold, clear purpose washed over me, extinguishing the last embers of my grief. I was not a victim in a dusty workshop anymore. I was the heir to a secret empire. I looked at the rugged little laptop, its power light blinking expectantly in the darkness. They thought they had taken everything from me. They had no idea what I was about to take back. That night, for the first time in months, I didn't sleep, but it wasn't grief or fear that kept me awake. It was purpose. I sat at Arthur's old workbench, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating my face. And I studied. For hours, I delved into the world my husband had hidden from me. I read complex patent filings, corporate charters, and dizzying financial statements that tracked the flow of millions of dollars. It was a language I didn't fully understand. But the core message was clear: I was powerful. The most chilling section was the investigator's file on Isabel. It was all there: her trail of debt across Chicago, the failed businesses, and the profile of the man she owed money to, a predator named Silvio Mancini. Known for his creative and brutal methods of collection, Arthur had even included news clippings of people associated with Mancini who had simply disappeared. My blood ran cold. Isabel wasn't just trying to get rich, she was running for her life. And she was willing to sacrifice my entire family to save her own skin. At the first light of dawn, when the sky was a soft, pearly gray, I found the number Arthur had left for his lawyer. My fingers were steady as I dialed. A calm, professional voice answered on the second ring. Ben Carter. Mr. Carter, I said, my own voice sounding unfamiliar. Stronger. This is Margaret Miller, Arthur's wife. There was a pause on the other end, but it wasn't one of surprise. It was a heavy, knowing silence. Margaret, he finally said, his voice full of a weary warmth. I've been waiting for this call for 2 years. Arthur made me promise I wouldn't reach out first. He said you had to find your own way to the truth. Can you be in my office in Omaha by noon? The drive to Omaha was 3 hours of watching the flat, frozen plains fly by, but this time, I wasn't seeing a landscape of loss. I was seeing my land, my asset, my empire. I felt like a general surveying her territory before a battle. Ben Carter's office was in a historic brick building downtown. It was a quiet place of dark wood, leather-bound books, and the steady, rhythmic ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner. It was the kind of place where secrets felt safe. Ben was a man in his 70s, with kind eyes that held a shrewd intelligence. He looked at me not with pity, but with a profound respect. Arthur was the smartest man I ever knew, he said after pouring me a cup of black coffee. And the most stubborn. He knew what Isabel was from day one. He called her a human kudzu vine, something that strangles everything it touches. He spread a series of documents across his vast mahogany desk. He didn't just leave you the evidence, Margaret, he left you a loaded cannon. When he established the trust that holds the Terra General shares, he put in a key person clause. His death triggered a 5-year holding period where no controlling interest in the company could be sold or transferred without the unanimous consent of the board. He built you a fortress and gave you time to find the keys. He knew she'd try to sell the patent. I whispered, the pieces clicking together. He knew she was desperate. Ben corrected gently, and desperate people make mistakes. He's been protecting you all along. He had me put a quiet watch on Silvio Mancini's operations. We know Isabel has been making small payments, buying time, promising a massive windfall soon. She's planning her final move. Margaret, she's going to try and force a sale. For the next 2 hours, we planned. We didn't talk about reversing the court's decision on my competence or getting the kids back, not yet. That was the aftermath. Ben said we needed to focus on cutting the head off the snake. We don't go to the courts or the police right away, he advised. His fingers steepled. That would be messy and give her time to hide. To run. Arthur's plan was always more elegant. We let her walk right into the trap she thinks she's setting. The plan was simple, audacious, and utterly terrifying. We would use my position as the silent, unknown majority shareholder to watch her every move. Ben's contacts within Terra General would feed us information. We would wait for her to make her play, to call a board meeting, To present a buyer for the legacy patent. To put everything on the table. And then? I asked, my heart hammering. A slow, grim smile spread across Ben's face. And then, Margaret, you walk into that boardroom. And you introduce yourself. I left his office as the afternoon sun was beginning to dip. The grandfather clock chimed 3 times, marking the start of my new life. I was no longer a grieving widow or a helpless victim. I was the majority shareholder of Terra Gen. I was a client of the best lawyer in Nebraska. I was the executor of my brilliant husband's final, masterful plan. I was no longer just surviving. I was fighting back. The call came 3 weeks later. I was in the workshop, putting the final touches of varnish on the little wooden bird, when my phone buzzed. It was Ben. She's made her move, he said, his voice calm and steady as a rock. Emergency board meeting, Terra General Headquarters. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. she's found a buyer for the patent, a shell corporation, of course, and she's using her conservatorship over your estate to force the sale. The board is nervous, but she's a hell of a salesperson. Our inside man says she'll likely get the votes. We'll be there, I said, feeling a strange calm settle over me. The time for fear was over. The next morning, I stood in front of the Terra General Tower in Omaha. It was a monument of gleaming glass and steel, designed to look powerful and impenetrable. A year ago, I would have been intimidated. Today, I knew that I owned the most important brick in the entire building. I wore a simple navy blue dress, the one Arthur always said matched my eyes, and a string of pearls. I was not there as a farmer. I was there as a founder's widow. Ben met me in the lobby. Ready, Margaret? He asked, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. Ready as I'll ever be. Mon Amy, I replied. We didn't go right up. We waited in a small coffee shop across the street until Ben got a text. Leo just arrived with her, he said, nodding toward the entrance. Showtime. The boardroom was on the top floor, with a panoramic view of the city that seemed to go on forever. It was cold, sterile, and silent except for the low hum of the air conditioning and the clink of a silver spoon against a ceramic coffee cup. Isabel stood at the head of a massive granite table, looking every bit the powerful executive in a sharp, tailored suit. My son, Leo, stood just behind her, a proud smile on his face as he watched his brilliant wife command the room. He looked at her with such adoration, completely oblivious that he was a lamb raised for slaughter. Isabel was in the middle of her presentation, her voice confident and compelling. And so, by liquidating this single, underperforming asset, we can generate the immediate capital needed for a Q4 expansion into the European market. It is a strategic and decisive move that will guarantee shareholder value for the next decade. She was selling my husband's life's work as an underperforming asset. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. Just as the CEO was about to call for a vote, the boardroom doors opened. A young assistant looked in. Flustered, Mr. Davies, I'm so sorry to interrupt. But, Mr. Ben Carter is here. He insists it's a matter of board-level urgency. Every head turned. Ben walked in, his old leather briefcase in hand, looking completely at ease. I followed a few steps behind him, my heart hammering against my ribs. Isabel's eyes narrowed. Ben, what a surprise. This is a closed meeting. Leo just looked confused. Mom, what are you doing here? Ben ignored them both and addressed the CEO. My apologies for the interruption, Jim, but my client has a vested interest in this particular vote. I am the legal representative for the Miller Family Trust, which, as you know, holds the controlling 51% of this company's shares. A ripple of confused murmurs went through the room. Isabel's face went pale. The trust is under my husband's conservatorship, she snapped, her voice losing a fraction of its composure. A conservatorship obtained under fraudulent pretenses, as we will soon prove, Ben said calmly, but that's a matter for another day. Today, my client, the sole beneficiary and executor of that trust, would like to address the board herself. He stepped aside, and I stepped forward. Good morning, I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the silent room. My name is Margaret Miller. And that isn't just an underperforming asset you're about to sell. It's my husband's legacy. It's my legacy. I placed Arthur's rugged laptop on the table and connected it to the projector. The Terra General logo on Isabel's presentation was replaced by Arthur's research notes. Complex equations and genetic sequences filled the screen. My husband, Arthur Miller, was not just a farmer. He was the scientist who created the legacy seed on the very land my son and his wife have stolen from me. This patent is not just an asset of the company, it is the reason for this company. And it is not for sale. Isabel was on her feet, her voice rising. This is absurd. She's a confused old woman. The courts have confirmed it. Have they? I said, turning to her. Or did you just pay a doctor to say what you needed him to say? Did you drug my coffee during family dinners to create the symptoms you wanted? Did you lie about my grandson's allergies to manufacture a crisis? Leo took a step back, his face a mask of dawning horror. What is she talking about? Izzy? I didn't give her a chance to answer. I clicked to the next slide. It was a photo of a man. A hard-looking man with cold eyes. And I think, I continued, my voice dropping, that the real reason you're so desperate to sell is because you owe a man named Silvio Mancini in Chicago an extremely large amount of money. And his deadline is fast approaching. That was it. That was the final blow. The name Silvio Mancini hung in the air like poison. All the color drained from Isabel's face. She didn't scream or deny it. She just stared at me. Her mask of cool competence utterly shattered, revealing the terrified, cornered animal underneath. She stumbled backward, grabbing her purse. This meeting is over, she stammered. Oh, I believe you're right about that, Ben said, and quietly took out his phone. He pressed a single button. 2 seconds later, the boardroom doors flew open again. This time, it wasn't a flustered assistant. It was 2 uniformed police officers and a pair of plainclothes detectives. Isabel Miller, one of the detectives said, his voice calm and official. You're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and extortion. As they cuffed her, her eyes, wild with panic, found mine. All the lies, all the manipulation, all the performance was gone. All that was left was pure, venomous hatred. Outside the panoramic window, I could see more police cars pulling up to the curb far below. Their flashing lights like silent, victorious heartbeats. The reckoning had come. The aftermath of that day was a whirlwind. Isabel, facing a mountain of evidence and the testimony of a now terrified board of directors, took a plea deal. She's serving a long sentence for fraud and conspiracy. Silvio Mancini and his associates were picked up by a federal task force that same afternoon, turns out. Arthur's file gave them everything they needed to dismantle his entire criminal enterprise. And Leo, my son, he fell apart before he could be put back together. The truth of his wife's deception, of his own blindness, and of what he had almost lost, it broke him. But you know, sometimes people need to be broken before they can grow back stronger. He testified against Isabel, his voice shaking but clear, taking responsibility for his part in it all. The conservatorship was dissolved, custody of the children was immediately restored to me, and the farmhouse was mine once more. That was 6 months ago. Life on the farm is quiet again. But it's a different kind of quiet. It's not the lonely silence of grief, it's the peaceful hum of healing. Leo lives here now, in his old childhood bedroom. He works from sunup to sundown. His hands, once soft from an office job, are now calloused and capable. He's learning the land, learning the rhythms of the seasons, learning the language of the farm that his father knew so well. We don't talk about the past much. We don't have to. His penance is in his every action. In the respectful way he asks me about planting depths. In the gentle way he now reads to his children at night. He is slowly, quietly, finding his way home. The kids are thriving. The shadows have left their eyes, replaced by the simple, bright joy of being children on a farm. They help me in the garden. Their laughter the sweetest sound I've ever known. As for me, I took my seat as the chairwoman of the board at Terra Gen. Moi, a farmer in a boardroom full of suits. But I'm learning, and the first thing I did with my newfound power was to honor my Arthur's true legacy. I established the Arthur Miller Foundation, a nonprofit funded by Terra Gen, dedicated to providing legal and financial aid to family farms fighting hostile takeovers from big corporations. We are using our strength to protect others from the storm we endured. This morning, the 4 of us were out in the North 40. under the watchful branches of our North Star oak. It's spring now, and the earth smells rich and full of promise. We were planting a new crop, a special strain of Arthur's legacy seed. I showed Caleb how to place the seed in the soil, how to gently cover it up. Leo came over and stood beside me, watching his son. He has your touch, he said softly. He has his grandfather's heart, I replied. I looked out over our fields, stretching to the horizon. The land was the same, but we were different. We were survivors. We had faced the bitterest harvest and somehow, through love and a strength we didn't know we had, we were ready to plant again. We were ready for a new season. The core message, the strength in our roots. When you strip everything away. Margaret's story isn't just about a farm or a hidden fortune. It's about the quiet, unshakable strength that lies dormant within all of us, often in places we've long forgotten. It's a profound reminder that our worth is not defined by what others think of us, especially when they are actively trying to diminish us. For weeks, Margaret was made to doubt her own mind, her own reality, a painful experience that far too many people face in subtler ways every day. Whether in a boardroom, at a family dinner, or in a quiet conversation with a loved one, her journey shows us that the most devastating betrayals can sometimes force us to unearth a resilience we never knew we possessed. Arthur's secret wasn't just about the money, it was a testament to his faith in her. He knew the strong, capable woman he married was still there, buried under a layer of grief and gaslighting. He didn't leave her a rescue plan, he left her a key to unlock the power she already had. This story teaches us that our legacy isn't just what we build, but the truths we stand for and the strength we pass on. It's a lesson in trusting that quiet voice inside, the one that remembers who we truly are, even when the world is screaming at us to believe otherwise. We've all faced moments where we felt underestimated or unheard. I'd be honored to hear about a time you discovered a strength you didn't know you had. Please feel free to share your own story of resilience in the comments below. Your experience could be the light someone else needs. Wishing you peace and a bountiful harvest in your own lives.